Hey everyone, Alan Bahr here from Gallant Knight Games. We're here for Tiny Talk, our irregularly scheduled Tiny D6 GM advice, player advice, and conversation chat. So this, remembering the format because it's been a few weeks, 15 minutes. We get some questions in advance. You can ask questions in the comments on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, and we'll be happy to answer them. And these are Tiny D6 focused questions. All right, so I'm Alan Bahr, Gallant Knight Games, Tiny D6 questions. We got a few coming in. We're going to start with the easy one. So Tim Regan asked, for team traits to work in Tiny Supers, does everyone involved need the trait or just one? Tim is referring to the new team traits that appear in the Gallant Bahr campaign guide, which Kickstarter backers have received and which is forthcoming into the market soon. To answer the question, Tim, nope, only one person needs the trait. It represents their leading or supporting the team. So as long as one person has the trait, they can use the team trait to benefit the group. JD Stanek, and I apologize if I get these names wrong, asked a question for Tiny Talk. I want to make a cat-themed hero in Tiny Supers and realize there's no, quote, claws power. A lot of supers have claws, and they give a couple examples. Is it the melee version of the blast power? Question mark. No. So there's two ways you can do this. First, if you were to look at the Gallant Bahr campaign guide, you could use the signature weapon trait to clarify what the option is. And the signature weapon trait is a power trait that has 3 tiers, and it gives you some bonus options, and you could just use that. That's probably the easiest way if you have that book. If you only have the Tiny Supers core book, the standard melee weapon works, and by giving them super strength and reskinning it as their claw power, you could easily emulate that with the extra damage, some of the other advantages it gives them. So, I think, and I've talked about this before, and I'll say it again, Tiny D6, and specifically Tiny Supers, revolves around the concept of reskinning existing mechanics or using them as a baseline to tweak and modify, to fill in any holes that the game has. A minimalist game will not address every possible outcome, and a superhero game certainly, it's impossible to address every possible power combination. And so sometimes you need to take an existing power and you need to tweak it so it has something going forward. In this case, the sort of claws or signature melee weapon isn't really an area or power that we felt necessary to address between the existing power traits and traits like the signature weapon trait in the Gallant Bahr campaign guide or other powers. You can find plenty of options there. So I think that's my solution. Obviously, you could also just write a claws power if that's what you wanted, just a 3-tier claws power. So there's that. The bigger question is Jeff Wilkins asked, how do you minimize repetitive combat actions? And for some context, Jeff ran some Tiny Supers over the weekend, and he felt the combat got stale and repetitive as the players mostly had one signature move that allowed them to get max dice. So they tended to repeat that attack over and over. Definitely a valid concern. I think it's a valid concern in a lot of systems. If you are good at something, you want to press that button as much as possible, regardless of the game. Players want to feel competent, and they want to press the I'm good button as much as they can because that's what's fun. And I don't think that's a flaw. I think it's just an understanding of the psychology of playing an RPG to a degree. And characters in Tiny D6 are designed to feel very competent, and Tiny Supers especially so. So, Jeff, to answer your question, a couple things. One, focus on environmental effects. Have things that occur in the grand scheme of the fight in the same locale that they have to deal with. If every action they take is punching, they should have a consequence for not doing something else. That can be, in the case of a superhero game, hostages, right? If they spend their whole time punching the bad guy, does the other bad guy get the hostages? The classic multi-paths to success. Somebody's got to defuse the bomb. Somebody's got to punch the bad guy. Somebody's got to do all these different things. And so leveraging the environmental concerns is both the easiest and most obvious solution. The other obvious solution is to, when you build your bad guys, give them powers, setups, or traits that force the players to respond differently. You could, as a GM, not every bad guy needs to be built exactly to the player rules. You could write, in the case of you using these tree ent style characters, maybe their bark is so thick that melee attacks simply don't work, or maybe they are only, they take extra damage from fire, right? You want to present alternative resolutions so the players aren't just punching the same thing, which is a problem in all super games, and a lot of RPGs in general. If a player is exceptionally competent at something, they're going to want to do that thing. And to a degree, that's good. When a player writes something on their character sheet, they are telling you that they want to engage with that mechanical loop of the game. If a player writes, I am really good at swinging stop signs, you know they want to be able to swing stop signs, and you should put stop signs in scenes. And that's not bad. Players are communicating when they make their characters, and as a GM, it's our job to listen to what's on the character sheet and pull that into the game, because that is telling us what the players want to engage with. So there's a lot of options. I like enemies that split. I like out-actioning the players. In Tiny Supers, the force field power is a great way to penalize players. It forces them to only hit on a 6, which means they need to spend their time focusing. In one of our tiny zines, we have variant weapon rules that change how combat works with heavy weapons and light weapons, and those will be rolled into Tiny Supers one day. And when those come in, I think they'll force some different combat actions. They were written with the intent to force people to make decisions when attacking in combat. And part of it is, if players are attacking twice a turn, and they're not doing anything else, make the enemies hit them a little harder so they're forced to evade. There's lots of things to do that can minimize those actions, but to a degree, the players are going to want to hit the I'm competent button, and they should feel competent because they're heroes. And I'm not sure that's a design flaw so much as orientation around how we're telling a narrative or a story, especially in superhero games, because superhero games have a very different narrative flow than a lot of other storytelling genres do, because they layer a bunch of genres into the superhero narrative, and then they add an extra complexity of superheroes. And so I think that's a big thing to think about when we're running superhero games. Environmental concerns, situational concerns. Some bad guys should have solutions to the problem that force players to approach the obstacle with a different potential path to victory. And it's hard. I struggle with it. After GMing for years, I still struggle with. I get frustrated with the I'm competent button, and I want to penalize players, and I have to pull back and remind myself that no, the player wants to feel competent, and that's not bad. I just need to present options that penalize them. If a superhero is continually just beating the crap out of a bad guy, there can be real world consequences for that, right? Maybe their public reputation goes down. Maybe they aren't so much somebody who the fans love and the public is enamored with, because they're too violent, they're too brutal, they're too whatever. So I think there's some solutions, and then consequences matter. Rewarding players with substance when they describe interesting actions. Yeah, a super speed run up punch is still just a punch, but it sounds a lot cooler than I punch him. I zoom back and I zoom forward at a high velocity, and it sounds a lot cooler. So, leading by example, when you describe your attacks, kind of leaning into that, encouraging them to do the same by rewarding them with advantage or not penalizing them, things like that can go a long way to bringing that up. So those are the 3 questions we had in advance. 2 of them were easy. One is a lot harder, and every GM is different, and it's hard to, as the GM, it's hard to say, this is what works for me, it should work for you, because that's not the case. Everybody's table is different, everybody's GMing style is different. I'm a very cinematic, fight scene-oriented GM, and that's where my strengths lie as a GM. So, for me, this isn't necessarily a problem I faced. My problems are in other areas, which is, there are other areas. I'm not going to go into them because that's a different conversation. But they are there. So every GM has strengths, every GM has weaknesses, and finding the solution to what's your weakness doesn't always match what somebody else does. But I hope that helps, Jeff. It's kind of a difficult question to answer, but if you have any follow-up, we can talk about it on the next Tiny Talk. I'm happy to have a conversation, or maybe we can do a whole session about that. So let's take it to the audience. We got a couple of watchers, a couple of viewers. Does anybody have any questions about Tiny D6 or Tiny D6 related material that they want to ask? We're not getting any questions at the moment, which is totally fine. We had a bit of a break because of travel. But our next session will be in 2 weeks for another Tiny Talk. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in our Gallant Knight Discord. You can drop them in our Facebook group, the official Gallant Knight Games Facebook group. You can drop them on the comments on these videos if you want, and I will collate them over the next 2 weeks, and then we will go over them again. Any Tiny D6 game is published by Gallant Knight Games. It's fair limits. So feel free to ask any questions, and we'll do what we can and offer any advice we can. All right, folks. Thanks. It was a nice, quick session today, so we'll get back at it. Everyone have a good one. Bye.